Karen tried to push my kid off the slide. Didn't know I was already calling the cops. I had picked up my son from school not even 30 minutes earlier, and he'd asked, with those wide, hopeful eyes, if we could stop by the playground before heading home. I hesitated for a moment, glancing up at the clouds, but then nodded. There probably wouldn't be another chance to play this week if the rain stuck around, and honestly, he had been doing so well in school lately that he deserved the treat. The local park wasn't anything fancy, a few slides, swings, monkey bars, but it was a clean and well-loved space where moms, dads, and nannies congregated after school to let their kids burn off the last of the day's energy. When we arrived, it was already bustling. The swings squeaked rhythmically, and the air was filled with the soundtrack of childhood, laughter, high-pitched shrieks, and the occasional "be careful" from watchful parents. The wind carried a slight chill, just enough to make you wish you'd brought a warmer hoodie, but not enough to actually send you home. I let my son go ahead while I settled on a nearby bench, phone in hand but eyes mostly following him. He's a sweet kid, not the kind to fight for his turn or make a scene. He waited patiently near the base of the slide while a few other kids took their turns. I noticed some familiar faces from his school and gave a small wave to another mom I recognized. Everyone seemed to be in that pre-rain rush, getting in the last bit of fresh air before the inevitable downpour. That's when I heard the voice. Sharp, shrill, and completely out of place. "Move it, my kid first." The words cut through the ambient noise of the park like a siren. I turned just in time to see a woman, bleach blonde hair teased into a frizzled halo, massive sunglasses despite the lack of sun, and a leopard print hoodie stretched a bit too tight, marching toward the slide like she was about to shut the place down. Her kid, maybe 6 or 7, was trailing behind, sullen-faced with a red lollipop sticking out of his mouth like a pacifier. Before I could fully process what was happening, she stomped up to the ladder where my son had just started his climb. She didn't just shout. She physically grabbed his arm and shoved him aside, pushing her own kid past him. My son, surprised and clearly frightened, stumbled back and looked around for me. My heart dropped into my stomach and I was on my feet in seconds. I rushed over, gently checking my son to make sure he was okay. His arm was a little red where she'd grabbed him, but thankfully no bruises or scrapes. Still, he looked stunned and hurt in a way that wasn't just physical. I could feel my blood boiling, but I took a deep breath. Yelling wouldn't help, especially not with someone like her. I crouched next to him and whispered, "It's okay, sweetheart. I've got this." He nodded, still shaken, and sat down on the edge of the sandbox while I stood and turned to face the woman. She was now standing triumphantly at the top of the slide, arms crossed as her kid climbed up behind her. She had the audacity to glare at me like I was the problem. "Maybe teach your kid not to cut in line," she sneered. "We've been waiting longer." That was a flat-out lie. I had seen her arrive not even 2 minutes before she started this whole scene. I didn't respond to her. I didn't trust myself to say anything that wouldn't escalate the situation. Instead, I pulled my phone out of my pocket, opened the emergency app I had installed last year, and quietly hit 911. It was an app designed to call for help quickly with a single tap, and once sent, it shared my GPS location with emergency services. I turned the phone screen away from her and tucked it back into my hoodie pocket, the screen still active, just in case I needed to show it later. I wasn't going to get into a screaming match with this woman. I had already called for backup. The air in the playground had shifted. Other parents had noticed what happened, and a few were watching closely, unsure if they should step in or stay out of it. I saw one of the nannies, an older woman with silver-streaked braids, frown deeply and mutter something to the mom beside her. The tension was thick, the kind that wraps around your chest and makes every breath feel just a little bit tighter. Karen, because that's exactly what she was, continued her performance like she was on a reality show, loudly blaming everyone else for her behavior and playing the victim. "All these kids are so rude," she called out, making sure the whole park heard. "Their parents just let them do whatever they want." A few people shifted uncomfortably, but no one responded. I went back to my son, keeping a watchful eye on Karen while holding his hand. I could feel how small and warm his fingers were in mine, and it just made me even more furious that someone had put their hands on him like he was nothing. I bent down again, brushing a leaf from his jacket, and whispered, "Don't worry, honey. The police will be here soon." His eyes widened. "You called the police," I nodded. "That woman shouldn't have touched you. You didn't do anything wrong." He didn't speak, just leaned into me quietly. My heart ached a little that this had to be something he'd remember. The minutes stretched on, feeling longer than they actually were. Karen was now strutting around like a peacock, talking to no one in particular, loudly complaining about how this park had gone downhill, and how some people just don't know how to raise respectful kids. Her kid was now tossing handfuls of sand at another child near the swing set, but Karen didn't seem to notice or care. I glanced down at my phone screen. Dispatch had already received the ping. Officers were en route. The quiet rumble of a distant engine made my ears perk up, and soon I heard the subtle yet unmistakable sound of tires crunching gravel near the park's edge. Karen didn't notice. She was too busy telling some poor grandmother to watch her brat. I stood slowly, gave my son's hand a reassuring squeeze, and turned toward the park entrance. A police cruiser rolled up, 2 officers stepping out with calm but focused expressions. My hand instinctively went to my pocket to keep the emergency screen open, ready to show them. Karen had no idea what was coming. The air thickened as the police cruiser slowed to a halt by the curb, drawing the eyes of nearly everyone in the park. The distant hum of conversation quieted as the 2 officers stepped out, one a tall, broad-shouldered man with a clipped beard and mirrored sunglasses, the other a shorter woman with a steady, calm expression and a notepad already in her hand. Their uniforms were clean, their postures relaxed yet alert, and the mere sight of them seemed to settle some invisible charge in the playground. Parents exchanged glances, murmuring quietly. Some children paused mid-play, sensing the shift in adult energy. But Karen, oblivious and self-absorbed as ever, remained entirely unaware that the storm she was creating was about to be met with a much more powerful one. I stood beside the slide, still holding my son's hand, watching the officers approach with careful eyes. I knew the process. I'd worked briefly with community safety initiatives in the past, so I recognized their cautious pace and quick scans of the area. They weren't charging in, guns drawn. They were gathering visual context, assessing risk, reading the crowd. I raised my free hand slightly in a subtle wave to indicate that I had been the one who made the call. Officer Calm met my gaze first, offering a professional nod as she veered toward me, while her partner angled toward Karen, who was still berating a couple of teenage girls for hogging the swings and sitting like lazy sloths. Karen turned at the last second, noticing the presence of law enforcement only when the male officer was less than 10 feet from her. The transformation was almost theatrical. Her shoulders stiffened, her mouth snapped shut mid-insult, and she plastered a smile across her lips so fake it could have peeled off like a sticker. "Oh, officers, thank goodness you're here," she called, throwing her arms up in faux relief. "This woman here," she pointed dramatically at me, "has been harassing me in front of my child. I was just trying to let my son play, and she went ballistic." The officer didn't react. He didn't smile. He didn't nod. He simply tilted his head slightly, letting her words hang in the air for a beat, then replied in a calm, even tone, "We received a report of physical contact involving a child. We'll need to speak with both parties." Karen blinked, visibly thrown off by the lack of immediate validation. She began to stammer something about how these people always twist things. But the officer had already turned toward the small group of parents and nannies gathering by the edge of the play area, likely to speak with them next. Meanwhile, Officer Calm reached me, her demeanor steady and warm but unmistakably professional. I introduced myself and immediately explained that I was the one who placed the 911 call. Without needing prompting, I pulled my phone from my hoodie pocket and showed her the emergency app, the call log with the timestamp, and the dispatch response that followed. She took a brief glance, then knelt down to gently ask my son if he was okay. He nodded shyly, still holding my hand, and leaned into my side. I could tell it was taking all his strength not to cry again, not because of pain, but from the confusion and embarrassment of being shoved so abruptly. I stayed silent, allowing him space to answer, and Officer Calm gave a reassuring smile as she jotted a note on her pad. "I also have witnesses," I said, standing straighter. "That woman physically pushed my child. It wasn't just yelling, she grabbed his arm and shoved him aside so her own kid could take the slide. Several people saw it." The officer nodded, thanking me before gesturing to the gathering crowd. "We'll talk to them next." She paused before moving on and added, almost as an aside, "You did the right thing by staying calm." It was small, but hearing it from someone with authority helped settle the wildfire of frustration still burning in my chest. From the corner of my eye, I saw the male officer now surrounded by a semicircle of other adults, some moms, a few nannies, and a couple of dads who had clearly been close enough to witness the whole thing. One of the nannies, the older woman with the silver-streaked braids, was showing something on her phone screen. I felt a rush of relief. She had been recording. I hadn't even realized it at the time, but apparently she had the presence of mind to hit record the moment Karen started raising her voice. She gestured animatedly, replaying the clip with commentary to the officer, who stood listening attentively, occasionally looking over at Karen as she paced restlessly by the slide. It was clear Karen's narrative was unraveling quickly. Her confident swagger had turned into agitated foot tapping. Her eyes darted nervously from group to group, no longer certain who was on her side, if anyone. She made one last attempt to assert control, striding over to the officers and insisting loudly that she needed to leave because her son has a dentist appointment. But the request was met with a neutral but firm, "Ma'am, we need you to remain here while we complete the report." This is considered an active investigation. The word investigation seemed to finally penetrate her thick bubble of entitlement. Her mouth opened and closed, then opened again as if trying to find a new lie to spin, but she came up empty. She crossed her arms tightly across her chest and took a seat on a bench, muttering about how this is ridiculous. The officer returned to me once more, thanking me for my cooperation and confirming that based on the witness statements and the video evidence, it was clear that Karen had not only pushed my child but had done so unprovoked. They informed me that they would be writing an official report and that I had the option to press charges for simple assault on a minor. I felt a strange mix of emotions wash over me. I hadn't come to the park planning to get into a legal situation. I had just wanted my son to have a good day, to laugh and climb and play before the rain came. But now I was standing in the middle of a playground while officers filled out paperwork because some entitled woman couldn't teach her child to wait his turn. "I'd like to file," I said finally, my voice steady. "She touched my kid. That's not something I can just ignore." The officers nodded, and one of them quietly handed me a card with the case number and contact details for the department. "We'll handle the rest from here," he assured me. "If she tries to approach you again today, let us know immediately." The clouds above were darker now, and the wind had picked up just slightly, rustling the leaves with a low whisper. I looked down at my son, who was now sitting in the sand, calmly drawing lines with a stick, finally beginning to relax. I sat beside him and just watched for a moment. The playground, once tense and buzzing, had started to settle again. The kids had returned to playing and the adults went back to their quiet chatter, but the energy had shifted. Eyes still occasionally flicked toward Karen, who sat fuming alone on her bench, but no one spoke to her. In a way, it felt like justice had already started to work, not just in the form of the officers or the charges, but in the way the community silently rejected the behavior. And in that quiet rejection, there was something powerful. The breeze carried the first soft drops of rain as I stood beneath the swaying branches near the slide, my son beside me, now somewhat reassured but still casting the occasional nervous glance toward the woman who had shoved him. The entire situation still felt surreal, like we had stepped into a reality TV episode without signing up for it. The officers continued speaking with the other witnesses, gathering statements with the kind of professional patience that comes from dealing with chaos in calm tones day in and day out. Meanwhile, Karen remained seated on the park bench across the play area, arms crossed so tightly it looked like she might squeeze the breath from her own chest. Her foot tapped furiously, lips pursed like she was chewing on her own rage, and her eyes flicked between the officers, me, and the parents nearby who had either ignored her completely or turned away when she tried to make eye contact. It was in that moment, when the mask she tried to wear had fully slipped, that I realized something important. Karen wasn't just entitled. She was used to winning. She was used to steamrolling people with volume and aggression, counting on fear, discomfort, or politeness to silence those she bullied. It probably worked on retail employees, other moms at the PTA, maybe even neighbors too intimidated to deal with her loudness. But today, in front of so many eyes and 2 officers who were documenting every word and action, she was cornered. The confidence had drained from her like air from a leaking balloon, and now all that remained was a desperate woman scrambling to save face. I watched as her son returned to her side. He looked up at her uncertainly, clearly confused about what had just happened and why everyone was acting so tense. She didn't comfort him. She didn't explain. Instead, she hissed something under her breath while glaring at the officers. The child sat down at her feet, poking absently at the damp mulch, no longer full of bravado but quietly shrinking into himself. The rain picked up slightly, still soft but steady enough that a few families began packing up, folding strollers and calling to their kids. Some nodded in my direction as they left, silent acknowledgments of support, brief flashes of solidarity in the smallest gestures. One mom mouthed the words "good job" before slipping a rain cover over her baby's stroller and jogging off. The police had wrapped up their interviews with the remaining witnesses and returned to me with a summary. They confirmed they had multiple matching statements and at least one video showing Karen's aggression. They informed me that due to the child being involved, they had to treat the matter seriously, and since I wished to press charges, they would be proceeding with a citation and a formal report. They wouldn't be arresting her on the spot, but Karen would be required to appear in court, and failure to do so would escalate the matter significantly. At the mention of court, Karen's composure cracked once more. She leapt up from the bench, waving her arms as she shouted, "Are you kidding me? You're believing her. I barely touched that brat. He was in the way and she's just making a scene to get attention. I'm a good mother." Her voice echoed through the playground, drawing more attention from passers-by on the sidewalk just beyond the hedges. Officer Calm held up a hand with a practiced ease and said, "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to lower your voice. We've already collected witness statements and video evidence. This matter will be handled through the appropriate legal channels." But Karen didn't stop. She continued ranting, flailing her arms and throwing around accusations, claiming she was being discriminated against, that the entire park was against her, and even trying to spin a story that I had pushed her first, which was so laughably untrue I actually felt a short burst of disbelief-fueled laughter rise in my chest. One of the officers moved closer to her, speaking in a low tone that I couldn't hear, but whatever he said worked. She stopped mid-sentence, eyes narrowing as she crossed her arms again and slumped back into the bench with the dramatic exhaustion of someone who thinks being held accountable is the same as being victimized. I exhaled slowly. The confrontation had worn me out. I had only wanted to bring my kid to the park for 30 minutes of playtime before the storm hit. Instead, I ended up watching a grown woman throw a tantrum because her child wasn't first in line. And while the officers had done everything right, professional, respectful, thorough, I still hated that this had even needed their involvement. I hated that my son had to witness a stranger lay hands on him just to prove a point about being first. As the paperwork was finalized and handed to Karen, she snatched it from the officer's hands and stuffed it into her oversized purse. Her mouth twisted like she had just bitten into something sour, and though she said nothing further, the daggers in her glare were sharp enough. She scooped up her son by the wrist, dragging him behind her as she stormed off in the opposite direction of the parking lot. I wasn't sure where she was going, but I was grateful to see her go. The tension in the air lightened immediately, as if her presence had been weighing down everyone around her. A few parents lingered, still eyeing the officers or chatting softly in small groups. The nanny who had recorded everything approached me gently and offered to send the video directly to the officer's email. The officer accepted with a nod, thanked her, and gave her a business card with instructions on how to submit it officially. Then she turned to me once more. "You and your son are okay to go. If you have any follow-up questions, you can call the number on this card. Someone from the department will follow up within a week or so." I thanked her sincerely, not just for handling the situation, but for doing so in a way that kept things from escalating. She gave me a small smile and left with her partner, both officers disappearing behind the row of trees and toward the patrol car. The engine hummed to life, and within seconds the flashing lights were gone. I looked down at my son. The rain had dampened his hair and his jacket had started to cling slightly at the shoulders, but he didn't seem to care. "Can we still go to the store?" he asked quietly, as if unsure whether the world was still normal after what had just happened. I gave a soft laugh and ruffled his hair. "Of course, buddy. Let's go get snacks." As we walked away from the playground, the distant sound of kids laughing returned faintly through the falling rain, and I held my son's hand just a little tighter. Not because I was afraid, but because I was proud. Proud that I hadn't screamed, hadn't fought fire with fire, and hadn't let someone else's chaos define our day. I had called for help, stood my ground, and let truth do the talking. And for once, that had been enough. The grocery store was unusually quiet for the late afternoon, probably because the drizzle had now shifted into a steady rainfall, and most people had already hurried home to avoid the storm. I pushed the cart slowly down the produce aisle while my son, now a little more relaxed, walked beside me with his small umbrella tucked under one arm and a bag of pretzels clutched in the other. We were both still damp, shoes squeaking softly against the tile floor, but something about being indoors again, away from the chaos of the playground, helped clear the fog of tension that had been clouding the afternoon. I had replayed everything in my head a dozen times already. The push, the phone call, the arrival of the officers, the way Karen had twisted herself in knots trying to lie her way out of the consequences. I kept waiting for that delayed wave of anger to crash into me, the kind that sneaks up once the adrenaline wears off, but instead I just felt drained. Tired but not shaken, just ready to be home and done with the day. As we picked out a few essentials, milk, bread, fruit, I found myself instinctively scanning the store, not out of paranoia but simple habit, checking corners, watching people pass, making sure we weren't about to walk into another outburst. It was silly, I knew. This wasn't the kind of place where confrontations happened. Still, the emotional residue of what happened at the park clung to me like damp clothes, not soaking but persistent. My son, to his credit, seemed to have bounced back more easily. He was chatting now about school, his favorite teacher, how one of the kids had spilled juice during snack time and made a big mess. I listened, nodding, smiling in the right places, grateful that his world was still intact despite the ugliness we'd encountered just an hour before. We checked out with little fuss, the cashier giving us a polite smile as she scanned our items and bagged them carefully. I was half tempted to bring up what had happened at the park, to share it with someone just to get it off my chest, but I knew it wasn't the place or the moment. This wasn't one of those conversations you dropped casually into small talk. Besides, there would be time to share later, with my partner maybe, or with the other parents online who might understand just how jarring it had all been. For now, all that mattered was getting home, drying off, and reclaiming the peace that woman had tried to steal from us. Back in the car, the rain tapping steadily against the windshield, I finally exhaled a long breath and just sat for a moment. My son sat in the back seat munching on his pretzels and swinging his legs, humming to himself like the storm in our afternoon had never happened. It reminded me of how resilient kids can be, how quickly they return to their world of snacks and songs and silly stories, even when the adult world around them cracks open a little. I envied that. I started the car and drove us home through slick roads and slow traffic, headlights glowing like halos in the misty air. The city felt quieter than usual, like it, too, was bracing itself against something unseen. Later that evening, after dinner and a warm bath, my son was tucked in bed with his favorite stuffed dinosaur curled under one arm and a soft blanket pulled up to his chin. He fell asleep quickly, and I stood at his doorway for a few extra minutes, just watching his chest rise and fall, listening to the faint rhythm of rain against the windowpane. That peaceful silence, that ordinary moment of stillness, felt hard-earned today. It had taken everything in me not to lose my temper, not to scream or shout when that woman touched my child. But I knew if I had matched her energy, if I had made a scene of my own, it would have only fueled her narrative. She would have twisted it, claimed we were both unhinged, and the story would have changed. Instead, I had stayed quiet, measured, and firm. I had let the facts do the talking. When I finally stepped away from his room and made my way to the living room, I checked my phone and found a new notification from the local precinct. The case report had been logged and the citation issued. There was also a message thanking me for cooperating and a reminder of the court date, should I choose to attend. It felt oddly official, like seeing my own story typed out in a sterile document suddenly made it more real. I forwarded the report to myself and saved the case number, then sat back against the couch cushions, letting the tension in my shoulders slowly melt. My mind drifted again to Cairn, where she was now, what she was saying, who she might be calling to complain to. I could almost imagine her on the phone with a friend, ranting about being targeted or set up or betrayed by the system, because people like her never saw themselves as the problem. They always painted themselves as victims, even when the evidence was stacked against them. But I also thought about all the people who had stood quietly with me today. The nannies who offered their phones, the parents who vouched for what they saw, the officers who showed up, listened, and didn't let her noise overpower the truth. That community, the quiet strength of it, mattered more than I realized. It reminded me that you're never really alone in moments like that, even when it feels like someone is shouting over you. There are always eyes watching, ears listening, people ready to step in when it counts. I reached for the remote and flicked on the TV, not really to watch anything but to have something soft and normal in the background. A cooking show filled the screen, bright and cheerful, with a host laughing about overcooked pasta and butter mishaps. The contrast was sharp but welcome. It felt like reclaiming something, like proving to myself that our day didn't have to end in bitterness or fear. I could still laugh, still breathe, still find comfort in small, gentle things. That was the victory Cairn could never take. As the show played on, I finally allowed myself to stop thinking for a while. No more running the memory in loops. No more wondering if I should have said more or done something differently. I had done what I needed to do. I had protected my child, upheld my values, and let justice begin its course. And while the process wasn't over, while court dates and decisions still lay ahead, I knew we had already won something important. We had stood firm. We had not been silenced. Outside, the rain continued to fall. It washed the sidewalks, painted the streets in silver, and filled the air with that earthy, clean scent that only a storm can bring. And inside our home, everything was warm, safe, and still. The day of the court hearing arrived with a quiet weight that had been building for weeks. It wasn't dramatic or stormy like the day it all happened. No rain slapping against the windows. No gray skis rolling over the city in warning. Instead, it was clear and cool, the kind of crisp morning that carried a strange calm. I had gone back and forth about whether I should even show up. After all, the officers had enough witness statements and video evidence, and I had already submitted my account in writing. But something inside me wouldn't let it go unfinished. I didn't want my son to grow up thinking people like Cairn could do what they did and walk away unchallenged. I didn't want to leave it as just another story where the loudest person wins because no one else showed up to speak the truth. So I took a personal day off work, arranged for my mom to watch my son, and went to the courthouse, not out of vengeance or spite, but out of a quiet, steady sense of duty. Walking through the courthouse felt surreal. The walls were all beige and echo, the air buzzing with a tension that came from 100 small dramas playing out behind closed doors. I checked in at the front, was directed to a modest courtroom, and found a seat near the back. I wasn't nervous, not really, but I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on me like the air just before a thunderclap. When Karen entered, it was like watching a rerun of a show I'd already seen too many times. Same dramatic walk, same tight-lipped expression of smug frustration. Her outfit was subdued this time, probably an attempt to look respectable, but the way she kept glancing around the room with narrowed eyes showed her discomfort. I wasn't sure if she'd expected me to show, but when our eyes finally met across the room, her smirk twitched ever so slightly. She turned away and whispered something to the man next to her, maybe her attorney or a family member, and then pretended like she hadn't seen me at all. The hearing itself wasn't long. The judge was a middle-aged woman with sharp features and a voice that sliced through the room like a knife through butter. She had clearly seen her share of these petty civil disputes, but the moment the words "assault on a minor" were spoken, her demeanor shifted. It wasn't dramatic, but you could see the alertness in her eyes, the way she leaned forward slightly in her chair. She asked for the summary of evidence, which the officers had prepared in full, including the timeline of events, the video from the nanny, and the collective witness statements. As the footage played, silent but damning, you could feel the shift in the room. Karen had raised her voice, shoved a child, and then lied to cover it all up. It didn't matter how she dressed it up now. The facts were laid out with clinical precision, and her explanations came off as hollow deflections. When asked if she had anything to say, Karen launched into the same routine, blaming me, accusing the other parents of ganging up on her, insisting her actions were misinterpreted. But it was clear to everyone, including the judge, that she wasn't offering a defense, she was performing a denial. The judge cut her off gently but firmly, reminding her that the evidence had already been corroborated by multiple neutral witnesses, none of whom had any incentive to lie. "This court's concern," the judge said, "is not whether you felt justified, but whether you acted in a way that endangered a child. And you did." I didn't expect the verdict to hit me the way it did. I thought I would feel satisfaction, even triumph, but what I felt was something quieter. It was like a knot inside me had finally been untied. The judge issued a fine mandated anger management classes and placed a 6-month restraining order preventing Karen from contacting me or coming within 100 feet of my son. It wasn't jail time and it wasn't meant to ruin her life, but it was enough. It was accountability. She would be forced to reflect, to answer to the system she had always assumed she could outshout or outmaneuver. That was justice, not the kind that punishes with fury, but the kind that insists on truth. As the hearing adjourned, I didn't wait around. I stepped out into the sunlight, inhaling deeply, feeling the warmth on my face. For the first time since the incident, I felt like I could really exhale, not the shallow kind you let out when a problem is merely delayed, but the kind that follows real resolution. I got into my car, checked my phone, and saw a photo message from my mom. It was my son at the kitchen table, a dinosaur toy in one hand and a PB&J sandwich in the other, beaming at the camera like nothing in the world could go wrong. I smiled, holding the phone a little closer to my chest, grateful that his innocence had been protected just a little longer. When I got home that afternoon, my son ran to the door to greet me. "Did the bad lady get in trouble?" he asked, his voice soft but curious. I knelt down beside him, brushed a lock of hair from his forehead, and nodded. "She did," I said simply, "and she won't bother you again." He smiled, hugged me tightly, and ran back to his toys, satisfied with that answer. And maybe that was the best part of all, not the courtroom, not the ruling, not even the moment the officers showed up at the park. The best part was this moment, where I got to look my son in the eyes and tell him that yes, someone did something wrong, and yes, we stood up, and yes, the world listened. That night I lay in bed with the window cracked open just enough to let in the evening breeze. I stared at the ceiling, feeling the kind of tired that comes with peace rather than stress. The playground incident would always be a memory, an ugly one maybe, but not one that defined us. If anything, it had shown me who I was under pressure, what kind of parent I was, and what kind of community I had around me. And in the end, It reminded me that no matter how loud someone like Karen shouts, the truth speaks louder if you let it.